All right, it looks like it's noon, so we are ready to get started with our program here today. This is one of our virtual museum programs, the Charlotte History Toolkit, and today we have some special guests with us, Tom Hanchett and Mike Moore, as well as our own president and CEO, Adria Vogt. So we are so excited that everyone is able to join us today and be a part of our museum from home. Before we get started with the program, I just want to go over a couple of basic things about how this platform works and a couple of things about how to ask questions of our presenters, because I know I'm personally here because I want to learn more about how to use this particular historical resource. So to start out with, we are recording this program. So by joining us today, you are consenting to be on a program that is being recorded. We do this so that people later can access it, because we know that a lot of people might not necessarily be able to join us live, but are still very, very interested in being a part of our programs. So just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. Also, we've got just a few things here. When you join the meeting, please mute your microphones and turn off your video. That way, it's our presenters that are going to be able to fill your screen. If you are looking to make sure that you're not seeing all of these non-videoed participants, you can actually control your viewing experience with Zoom. All you need to do is hover across the top, and it'll allow you to hide all non-video participants. If you want to ask a question, please use the chat function. This particular function is located at the bottom of your screen. It's going to look like a little talking bubble. You can ask those questions, and later in the program, we will be happy to bring those to the attention of our speakers. And if you're having any sort of problems, if you need any technical help, we have education associates that are standing by. We'll be happy to try to walk you through making sure that you've got anything that you need with regard to that. So use the chat. You can actually send a message directly to us, or if you can't figure out how to send a message directly to us, go ahead and just ask the group chat. If you have a question, there's probably a good chance someone else has that same one. So thank you so much for joining us for this Museum from Home. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our president and CEO here at the Charlotte Museum of History, Adria Vogt, who's going to be your host today.
Hi folks, welcome to our Museum from Home program today. I am so excited to be here with you. We have a great topic and great speakers. I wanted to share with you that we do have, the Charlotte Museum of History currently has a matching gift campaign. So if you are feeling generous today and want to support free digital programs like this, free Museum from Home educational opportunities, check out our website at charlottemuseum.org and go to our donate page. We have a matching gift campaign thanks to the Weatherspoon Family Foundation, and your dollar can go twice as far now through June 30th. So thank you for supporting our free events like these. Our topic today is so exciting. We got to see a little bit behind the scenes of this website coming to fruition, and get to see local historians engaging in the conversation about how this resource can serve people and how it can best be intuitive and user-friendly. So I'm so pleased to be here today with Dr. Tom Hanchett, a community historian here in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's currently the historian in residence at the Robinson Spangler Carolina Room of the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library. You have a great team there. We love you all and love what you do for our community. Thank you. Previously, Tom served as a staff historian for 16 years at the Levine Museum of the New South, where he curated the permanent exhibit Cotton Fields to Skyscrapers, and a string of national award-winning temporary exhibits, including Courage, about the Carolina roots of Brown versus Board in this case. Tom's writings range widely. He talks a lot about urban history and Southern culture. His book, Sorting Out the New South City, is one of the best sellers in our gift shop. And Tom does a range of things, including playing the fiddle. So he's one of our favorite public historians here, as well as J. Michael Moore, who has been such a great friend to the history community. He has moved to Charlotte after for the past 6 years. He's been an independent public historian here, and he practiced history in the New England area for 2 decades. So lots of expertise that he's brought to this community, and we're so pleased to have him here today. He's currently documenting the history of the African American community building in West Charlotte for the West Charlotte Neighborhood Coalition. And he served as a consultant with the Levine Museum of the New South in the creation of several of their exhibits, including their current exhibit, It Happened Here, Lynching and Remembrance, which tells the story of 2 men who were lynched in Charlotte in the 20th century. A really important public history that you all are doing, and we're so glad to have you here today to talk about this great new resource, the Charlotte History Toolkit. For those who want to toggle around online while we're talking, the Charlotte History Toolkit is at charlottehistorytoolkit.com. And I will introduce now our friends to tell us a little bit more about how this resource came to be and how it works.
So good to be here. Thank you so much. We're tickled to see folks out there in Zoom land who we recognize. Gary Ritter, who was a host for many years of the Trail of History program on CPCC, professor at CPC Community College, as well as a WTVI personality. Neil Mehra is also here, and he's been a mentor to Michael and myself. He was a digital editor, I guess, one of the people behind the scenes at The Observer for many years who got them online and is now doing a national project helping media companies that have archives figure out what to do with them. So good to see you all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us. I hope everyone is staying well and safe, and that all of your people are well and safe. And it's a pleasure to be able to meet with you all through this means. And it seems like maybe this topic is an appropriate one for this kind of meeting, because a lot of what the toolkit does is show you what you can do online. So maybe this is an appropriate way to get together right now.
And before we get too much further, has anyone poked around online and would want to unmute yourself for a second and just tell us what you've found so far? Anybody? Anybody gone to charlottehistorytoolkit.com already? You don't have to have, but if you have, we'll bring you into the conversation.
I'll get the conversation started. Yes, I have poked around on it. I actually spent a lot of time looking around my neighborhood, and my neighborhood is a wonderful mix of older properties and newer properties. So it was really fun for me to see exactly sort of the history of this particular area. So I had a great time on Polaris, actually. Cool.
Yeah, Polaris is the, why it's called Polaris, I don't know, but we'll tell you about that in a little bit. But it's the database that lists government information, tax information, deeds, things like that. And you can look up any address in the city on it. Anybody else?
This might be a time to give a shout out to those people and agencies that have created all these databases that we're able to access here. You know, we're just building on many, many years of work to create these digitized sources, and both libraries and public agencies, the county, the Register of Deeds, and it's been an enormous amount of work to begin to put this stuff available online. And museums in particular are doing a lot more these days, and this can only grow as a resource, I think.
Particularly the Carolina Room of the Public Library. If you all have not been down to the Robinson Spangler Carolina Room, you need to go, but right now you can get online at their website, which is cmstory.org, like Charlotte Mecklenburg story.org. So I commend that to you, and I thank Dr. Tom Cole, who's one of the reference librarians there, who very much helped us figure out all of this stuff so we could put it on the web. So thank you all. Adria, you had a question or two to start us off.
Well, I think you've touched a little bit about the sort of partnerships, the different people who've come together, but could you talk a little bit about what, how this came to be in terms of, was it a response to, these are the types of questions that we get, and we know we want to facilitate this conversation digitally. How did this resource come to be, and how did the history community help you refine it into the great product that it is today?
Well, I can tell you that the Carolina Room gets questions all the time about buildings, neighborhoods, people back in the day. And they're super happy to help you, like they helped us. But a lot of that stuff now is available online. The way I got into this, I came to Charlotte originally to work for the Historic Landmarks Commission. And my job was to do exactly this kind of neighborhood-based research. And the work that I did is online with Historic Landmarks and also on charlottehistorytoolkit.com. But as I began to look toward retirement from Levine Museum, I wanted to get back into it. And I'm really good at going down to the courthouse and pulling the deed books off, but you don't have to do that anymore. And I met this really cool guy, Mike Moore, who said, you know, that's online. And so he would teach me. And I'm kind of slow. And so he would teach me again. And I figured it made sense to have a place where that was written down so I could find it again. And we spent a long time doing this as a PowerPoint, showing it to people and making it simpler.
Yeah. And of course, it goes without saying that it's a great pleasure to work with Tom, one of the great collaborators in Charlotte and connectors of people. You know, I moved here half a dozen years ago, and I moved to this little neighborhood on the south side of Dilworth. Being an urban historian, I was curious about it, and there were all these small post-World War II houses, and then a lot of new houses getting built, and I was curious about what was this place. And so as I started to look, I started to discover that there were indeed a lot of deeds and maps you could find online, and one thing led to another. And then I ended up connected up with Tom around this stuff. So I was able to find out some really cool stuff that I had no idea, and maybe most people don't today even, like the professional baseball park that many of you know and remember that was in the center of this neighborhood. Was actually a project of the Washington Senators and the local American Legion team. I mean, American Legion Post, who wanted to create headquarters of their own and use WPA funds to create it like they created Memorial Stadium. We've been able to work on the toolkit and refine it a lot through the help of some regular get-togethers with interested people, and the city's neighborhood support and neighborhood services program was really central to that, because they've done so much work to connect people in neighborhoods and to help train people to organize in their neighborhoods. And so they have a lot of folks who are naturally interested in this sort of thing, and they're willing to come out and talk about it, and that was a big help.
Well, Mike, can you show us how it works? Can you pull up the website and maybe we can toggle around a little bit and show our public how it works?
Let's do it.
Cool.
What we're going to try and do is we've got an introductory video that we're refining, so we'll use you guys as guinea pigs for that. And I'll try and say some words, and Mike is he's the one that's got the website up on his screen. Can you all see that? I hope you can see the website that says Research Your Neighborhood, CharlotteHistoryToolkit.com. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm getting echo. Mike, maybe is your, maybe you want to unmute. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wherever the echo is not from Mike. So Mike, you can go ahead and unmute yourself so we can hear you if you need to break in.
Hello.
All righty, wonderful. So let me just welcome you to the CharlotteHistoryToolkit.com. It's a set of tools, tips, and web links for exploring the history of where you live. And you've already been introduced to Mike and myself. We've given a plug for the Robinson Spangler Carolina Room. The basis of the toolkit is your questions and how you take little bits of information and put them together. What kind of questions? Well, do you have an address that you're curious about? Maybe your own address. Do you have a neighborhood name or a street name that you're curious about? Do you have the name of a local person back in the day? Charlotte History Toolkit shows how that one nugget of knowledge, a name, an address, can be used to find other nuggets of knowledge. And then what you do is you begin to put those together and build a story. We call that being a history detective. If you're a detective out in the world, you take little clues, put them together, same thing here. So what you're seeing is the front page, and at the top on that menu bar are the 5 big resources that we introduce you to: newspapers, city directories, plat maps, property deeds, and building permits. With each of them, we'll give you a written instruction and or a video to watch. You can do either one. And we need to caution you that the links work only for Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. But if you live outside the area, you might still want to look at this because the toolkit can give you ideas of things to look for in your area. So what we suggest is going up to that menu bar and look over at the FAQ section, frequently asked questions. And so do that, and you find questions, and you can browse through this. One we get a lot is, where do I find photos of my house or neighborhood? Turns out that's pretty tough to do. Does a written history of my neighborhood already exist? And yes, older neighborhoods, these are some that I did, Dan Morrill, other folks. There are a number of histories of pre-World War II neighborhoods, almost nothing about post-World War II neighborhoods. What books can give you a overview of Charlotte history, suburban history. And also, yep, there you go. And then other primary sources. And there are annexation maps, there are insurance maps, there are even things like high school yearbooks. And we give you links to all of those, tell you how to use them. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here. But let's go back to the main menu. Let's look at newspapers, and we'll give you a sense of how that one section works. And then we'll see if you have questions, comments. We probably will go on and look at the other sections one by one. The basis here is a database that the Charlotte Public Library offers. And you have to have a library card. We even give you a spot there to get your library card online. But the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library has subscribed to a service that has the Charlotte Observer digitized back to the 1880s, and it's all word searchable. We tell you how to do that in a video form, or if you don't like videos, we'll tell you step by step. And on the right, we give you an example of some things that we found. Mike Moore on West Boulevard ran into a neighborhood called Reed Park. And so he went to the newspaper. He has a name now. Went to the newspaper, looked up Reed Park, and there is the land sale for Reed Park back in the, I guess, 40s. Right. It says for colored people. This was an African-American neighborhood from the very beginning. And down in there, I don't know if you can see it, it talks about the Ross Reed Farm. There was a person named Ross Reed. Okay, so you now have another thing to look up. Turns out Ross Reed was a major African-American real estate developer. There's, wow, just all sorts of stuff. On the right, you can see the John Crosland ad. Some of you, if you've been around Charlotte a long time, Crosland's still very active today, but there are some of the early suburbs that Crosland did with a map of where they were. That's cool. And then Hidden Valley. Hidden Valley is a neighborhood up on Sugar Creek Road area. And 1961, it says vets, no closing costs, no down payment. That's part of the GI Bill, which was a big deal after World War II, helped a lot of people buy their houses. And so what you're seeing here are all sorts of different kinds of clues that will take you in different directions. So that's newspapers. Let's go to city directories real quick. City directories, if you've done a lot of research, you know about these, but if not, this may not be familiar. These are really cool. They're kind of like the old phone books. Remember phone books? Public Library has just about all of them, come out every year, and they list every house, every building in the city by address, and then they kind of scramble that, and they have an alphabetical section that lists every person by name. And that is just powerful. Not only do they list folks by name, but they also tell what they did for a living. They'll tell what the spouse's name is. Up there you see Undine Graft, who lived in Mike's neighborhood. She was a widow. There's her husband's name. Right under that is Kenneth Gregg, I love these names, who was a traffic manager at the Quartermaster Depot. If you know a little bit of Charlotte history, you know that's now Camp North End. It's a big deal in World War II. So again, just having an address, you can come up with a name. just having a name, you can come up with all sorts of other stuff. Let's look at plat maps real quick. I'm on a roll. I'm going to keep talking. Nobody's interrupting me. Plat maps and deeds both come off of this county database that they put together for tax purposes, but it's got all sorts of other stuff in it. And Mike is just a magician at getting into what's called Polaris 3G. But you don't have to be a magician because he's written down the steps. You can see 6 steps here to get you in, or the video will show you. Scroll back up, Mike, and why do you want to look at a plat map? Well, this is the plat map of Mike's own neighborhood. Down at the lower left, you see the name of the subdivision. Mike thinks he lives in Dilworth, but show with your cursor where that subdivision name is if you can. I'm not sure if I see it. There you go. It turns out it was originally called Sunset Hills. Another name that you can run through the Charlotte Observer. There's the owner of the property. There's the date the neighborhood was laid out. And look up at the top, and there is that ballpark he was talking about. It's, if you know Dilworth area, it's where the Lowe's is, near Ideal Way. If you've been around Charlotte a long time, you know that. If you're new, like so many of us are, this is new history. And so plat maps, very powerful. Take a look at deeds. Deeds, the same database, but they have hooked that up to scans of every single property deed in Charlotte. Every property has deeds for the current owner, which link to the previous owner, which link to the previous owner, something called chain of title. You can see it gives you the date of sale, the seller, the buyer, and also restrictions. Something that's been in the news recently, race restrictions. Those are in a lot of our older neighborhoods. How do you find them? Racial restrictions no longer enforceable. But boy, that's a fascinating part of our history that we need to know about. Sometimes they deal with other things. You can only build a house on the property, or you can't build a shed on the back. You can't keep pigs and chickens. It's amazing what's written in deeds. The last thing of our 5 is building permits. It's the only thing that's not online. Those at the Carolina Room, and they show you often the builder, sometimes the contractor, date of construction, the property owner. Here you'll see it's Charlotte Investment Company, Charlotte Investment Company. That means that both, that the house basically was built on spec. When the building permit was filed, they didn't have an individual owner yet to file it in that person's name. And so the company that built it filed it. So those are all of the pieces. And you can find those only at the Carolina Room, the building permits. Let's go to the sample story real quick. And the sample story is a work that I did for an organization in Oaklawn Park up near Johnson C. Smith. And I'll just run through that real quick. I had a name, Oaklawn Park. I went to the newspaper. There is the first advertisement for Oaklawn Park. It says colored, and that's because it too was originally an African-American neighborhood, but it says it's developed by the Irvin Construction Company. Again, if you've been around Charlotte a long time, you remember Irvin, not just a big home builder in Charlotte, but nationally. Now bankrupt, out of business, not a name that's well remembered. A variety of different ads, keep scrolling down. There was even an article about how cool this neighborhood was. So a lot of pieces by just finding things in the newspaper, keep scrolling. And then plat maps. Well, I know some of the street names in Oaklawn Park, but I didn't know how big it was. And here are the original plat maps filed at the Register of Deeds, and one of them mentions Miles Court, which was a nice little street. So I went to the city directory and I looked up Miles Court, and on the left in 1958, most of the houses are under construction. Cool, all built at the same time. That's pretty neat. By 1959, over on the right, most of them are occupied. And we could look up any of those people in the city directory, but I looked up Raymond Worsley, Reverend Raymond Worsley. He's over in the 1958 thing. And scooch down, and there he is, Reverend Raymond Worsley Magnolia, that's his wife. He was an instructor at Johnson C. Smith University, so not just a minister, reverend, but also a professor. And Magnolia, if you look up just a little bit, Magnolia is listed separately. Not all the city directories did this, but some of them did. If a woman worked outside the home, they listed her separately. She was a nurse at Northwest Medical Center. So now I've got a bunch of names to look up, and I go back to newspapers, and there's Reverend Raymond Worsley, one of the first African Americans in the Marine Corps nationally. Cool. That was a very exciting day when I found that. And keep scrolling down. Property deeds, turns out the family owned that property for over 50 years, which tells you something about how desirable the neighborhood was. Down at the bottom, building permits. There's the original building permit on the left. On the right, a permit when an addition was made, and it shows you where it was on the house, and I think it tells you that it's supposed to be, yes, used as a den. So we have a date and more information on the changes to a property. And at the very bottom, I quickly put together a story based on the pieces of information that I just showed you how to get. And at the very bottom, it says this essay, that's a detailed neighborhood history that gives you a sense of how you can kind of pick up all of these tools and clues and really run with them. So I talked a whole bunch. Somebody else talk. Questions, comments, reactions?
One question that I have is, were you inspired by other platforms like the North Carolina Digital Heritage Center's website, Digital NC, or are there other local websites like this that you were inspired, or was this a sort of novel concept for you?
As far as I know, nobody has done this kind of toolkit. But like Mike said, what is online now is literally changing every week. More stuff being online. We just found the Library of Congress has done amazing color scans of all the Sanborn insurance maps. Those are a resource that cover kind of the heart of the city. So if you're out in the suburbs, it doesn't work for you. But next to Levine Museum of the New South, you may know there's an old red brick building. You can trace that back in the city directories back to the 19th century. Find out when it had porches on it at one point, it had outbuildings. All of those kind of details are available through this Library of Congress Sanborn website. What other kinds of websites have you found, Mike, that are so cool?
We weren't able to find anything like this. There's some places like Seattle, Washington that have really wonderful levels of community history and documentation, and they have websites that show that. But as far as sort of a how-to about how to work with this stuff, I think we seem to be breaking new ground here. And there are comparable resources in most places, but each locality has its own history of how they go about creating those records, digitizing those records, making them available. So I think this has potential as a model for other people to think about as they try to work through their own sources and put them up online.
What are you most excited to see digitized next? What's still in archives that needs to be on the priority list?
Well, for me, Tom is a proselytizer for city directories with good reason, because they're incredibly rich sources. And it's incredibly frustrating to realize that anything that was published after 1963 city directory is not available online. So if the more modern directories were made available, that would be an enormous step forward in our research capabilities. What about you, Tom?
There you go. I'm always loving city directories. There's just so much information in them.
So will you still look through those physical archives from time to time, even if they are digitized? You still nostalgic for the bookshelves?
Less than I was. I didn't think you could get an interface where you could move through a city directory. The thing with city directories is you want to compare one year with another year. And so you pull them both off the shelf, and then when you have to go back, you end up with this table full of city directories, and you're moving from the alphabetical section to the, and how do you do that online? Well, it turns out that this interface makes it super easy. Instead of having to figure out where Undine Graf is in the city directory, you just type in Undine Graf, and there she is. You can go very quickly, and you can take screenshots. And so the quality of research, I used to write all of this stuff down longhand, and I would make errors, and taking screenshots and putting them in a folder on my desktop turns out to be really efficient. Same thing with Sanborn maps, another situation where you wanted to compare and contrast, and being able to go right there and screenshot is a game changer.
So do you have any stories to share about how you've seen people using this, or how you anticipate people using it in the future, the community that it will serve? Is it a lot of people looking for nostalgia? Is it homeowners? Is it students? You know, who are the audiences that this research tool will serve?
Well, we mentioned neighborhood activists and neighborhood organizations as one example of folks who've already tapped into it. And that's certainly an important part of it, I think. I have two brief stories about stuff on the west side of Charlotte where the toolkit has already been useful to folks. There's a neighborhood called Springfield in Steel Creek, and folks there are interested in the historic use of a particular site there, which they think might have contained a gas station long ago. And just using the access to the deeds and plat maps on the toolkit, it didn't take very long to discover that when the urban company was building that neighborhood, they actually built a convenience store called a handy pantry.
This was a new thing in the 60s. I can remember that. I'm suddenly excited about convenience stores because of this question and what Mike found. Keep going.
Right. So it turns out that there were, by 1964, there were 13 handy pantries across Charlotte. And there 8 of them, those buildings are still on the ground, and you can look at them and see and many of them are convenience stores too, but none of them are handy pantries. But, it doesn't take long to have a bit of information, use the toolkit, and open up a whole conversation and a whole, means of exploration for these topics. And sometimes it takes you places you had no idea where you're going to go. The other example is with the folks from the Clanton Park Neighborhood Association. Clanton Park is a West Side neighborhood just west of I-77 near Revolution Park. And it was built by John Crossland and Irvin starting in the 1950s. It's overwhelmingly African-American neighborhood now, but when it was built as a white neighborhood. Today, the neighborhood association is faced, like many neighborhoods on that side of town, with these pressures of gentrification. And there are a lot of elderly African-American homeowners there that are getting inundated with contacts of people wanting to buy their homes. So what we're able to do using the toolkit is to figure out how that situation came to pass. And it turns out that there was a very specific instance in 1967 where a builder wanted to build a rent subsidized apartment complex right next door to the Clanton Park neighborhood. And that resulted in, a fight on the part of the residents to preserve the neighborhood, to fight that because there was a fear that African-American renters would move in. And over the course of only a few months, literally half of the homes in Clanton Park get put up for sale. And over the course of a year, the white flight is astonishing. And so there are all these folks who live in Clanton Park now, who in 1967, 1968, they bought their houses because now they had an opportunity to get into that neighborhood, and they're still there today. And the key for them is to how do you how do you maintain that equity and build on that equity for you and your family in the neighborhood? So, yeah, it's just a lot of different ways you can use this to.
We have a question in the chat from someone who says, I looked at the toolkit, viewed my neighborhood with excitement. This is wonderful, thank you. Where would I go to learn where the land was deeded to prior to the online record date? My little neighborhood was just land prior to the build. I'm in Southeast Charlotte. Let me try answering that, and then Mike, who tends to know more about this, can correct me if I'm wrong. One thing that you can do is, as you get into that Polaris site where we direct you to the deeds, fairly recent deeds are listed on the Polaris site, and you can go literally right to the deed. Eventually, you get to the oldest deed that they have a link to. There may still be older deeds, and then you do something called chain of title. Within a deed, it says when the property was purchased, who the previous owners were, and it gives a book and page for where that previous deed is. And so you can kind of chain backward. So that's one answer to how to get back to the original deed when the land was broken up from the farm. The other is to go into the plat map and through Polaris, find your plat map, and your plat map should say that this is name of subdivision, developer, date, and before that it was a farm. Who owned the farm? That's kind of hard to tell at that point. You can ask the folks at the Carolina Room or use the contact us feature on the website, and we may be able to coach you around that. But also the newspapers work pretty well. I've found once I have the name of a development, developers like getting their information in the paper. That's part of their advertising. And so there may be a little article that says developer such and such has bought the old whatever it is farm and is about to lay out 50 fine houses. And so that's another way of getting back around to that early kind of question. Mike, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say that, searching the deeds is the key for you. That if you follow this deed chain of title search suggestions, what you need to do is to find a deed where the developer of your neighborhood has purchased the land. And once you find that deed will reference the person they bought it from, typically a longtime homeowner, a longtime, say, farmer or landowner out in that part of the county. So the deeds will be key. And the great thing about the deeds is that they cover the county, all of Mecklenburg County, as do the plat maps. So some of the information we're looking at is just for the city of Charlotte, but in the case of deeds, it's for the entire county. So, the city of Charlotte was just a small part of the county for a long time, but most of Mecklenburg County is part of Charlotte now. So the area that you're talking about could very well have been within the county at the time, but that doesn't stop the deeds from being useful, and that's the key place to go.
I'm curious out there if anyone has sort of general questions, or if someone has can see how this might apply to their neighborhood. Someone here says, are there specific resources or tips for researching a home or neighborhood that was part of a mill village? The interesting resource there would be in the FAQ section, under landmarks and districts, there are links to the North Charlotte district, which is a historic district, and through that you can find what's been written about that. Historic Landmarks Commission has a website, landmarkscommission.org. And if you get onto landmarkscommission.org and research the name of your mill or mill village, you can probably find material that has been found, that has been put there. Anybody else?
I think you've created a really intuitive tool here. I think that's why we don't have so many questions, because it really is intuitive, and it gives us a resource to be able to really go down some rabbit holes, some fun rabbit holes, as folks who are interested in all sorts of different aspects of Charlotte and Mecklenburg's history. I hope that it inspires both our communities to learn more about the history, sometimes hidden history that surrounds us. And I also hope that it will inspire other communities to provide similar resources like this. I mean, it's really exciting that this is sort of a new format. I couldn't think of one or come up with one that is similar to this. And I know it's going to be so useful for so many different people for so many different reasons. So thank you for putting this together and for making this available to the public. Lauren, did you have any other questions that we needed to bring out with our guests today?
It looks like we do have a question. I have someone that raised their hands, and it's someone that we've worked with in the past and has done some incredible research here. So I'm really excited to hear what his question is. Jimmy, did you want to unmute yourself and ask this, or do you want to type it in the chat for us? Let's see, I can see if I can do that on my end here. Give me just a second.
And I can hear Jimmy Kirkpatrick. Good to talk to you.
Hey,
Thank you, Tom.
He's one of our fellow wizards. We learn from each other, the folks who do this kind of history.
That is true. I do want to thank everyone. This is so fantastic. Again, my name is Jimmy Kirkpatrick. I was born and raised in Greers Heights community. Currently live in Portland, Oregon. So I'm just grinning ear to ear because
You're coming in from Portland today?
I'm coming in from Portland. And you know, when I come home, which is more and more these days, I spent more time up on 4th Street in my old Brooklyn neighborhood looking for information on my family, and to have all this in one stop shopping is great. But one of the projects, and Tom, you know, you've done research on my neighborhood. My great-great-grandfather, Jim McVeigh, was one of the early founders of the community. And one of the projects that I'm doing in addition to my own genealogical research is to try to identify some of the original founders of my community. Many of them came from farms and plantations out in South Charlotte. My great-grandfather, Sam Kirkpatrick, bought property in the 1890s that's in currently Sherwood Forest area. The whole Sherwood Forest was 180 acres of Sam Kirkpatrick property. And so I'm trying to get this connection with Greer Heights and before. So this allows me to try to find out some of these original names of folks in my community and kind of trace them out and back. So this is great for that. I'm also have a question on records and death certificate records. As you know, some for African Americans, I think, if I'm not correct, it wasn't until about 1918 or so that Mecklenburg County officially kept death records for African Americans. I have through my church records some records of folks, but I'm unable to find a couple really important family members' death certificates. I have their date of death. One died in my great-great-grandfather was born in 1850, died in 1929, and there's no death. I'm unable to find his death records publicly. I see that it exists maybe in Raleigh. And the same thing with my great-great-great-grandmother, who was born in 1838. So I'm trying to find, obviously when you find these, you can find who their parents were and other things. So I guess my question is, for those that I just can't do Ancestry to find those direct death certificates, but they're registered in North Carolina. How do I go about, besides going to Raleigh? Are those available online, or can I get them through this process or through the website?
Let me give you a sort of a general answer, which I'll bet you already know, but other folks on the Zoom may not. The most general answer is that's not something we included in the toolkit because of the difficulty of getting into it. And so what we suggest when you come up with something like that we don't give you a good answer for is to contact the folks at the Carolina Room.
Okay.
They're really good at getting around genealogical barriers, and they're very patient and persistent in making that happen. I know you work closely with them, but if that's a question that other folks have about death certificates or anything genealogical, Carolina Room, the Downtown Public Library. Mike, other thoughts?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have any insight into your question, Jimmy, that stuff that you haven't already pursued.
Right. Well,
I know how thorough you.
Long shot thing, you may not have tried this, is to try running those names through the Charlotte Observer. There are a bunch of reasons why an elder African American would not show up in the Charlotte Observer. Racism, were they considered important? But I've been amazed that all sorts of people who were not officially considered important got their names in the paper. And death notices, obituaries. At some points, the Observer literally listed everyone who died in the city yesterday. It's a long shot, but give it a shot. If you haven't looked in the Charlotte Observer, try those names and variations on those names. If I was looking you up, I would look up Jimmy Kirkpatrick, Jimmy L. Kirkpatrick, J. L. Kirkpatrick, James Kirkpatrick. And if you keep doing that, maybe eventually you'll get something.
I've been called all of those. Thank you again, Tom, and what all you guys and what your work is doing there. I love my city, and this is so fascinating on a personal level to get back and to know more about my city's history and the communities. And I'm just learning something every day. And this is just a great tool to have. And again, thank you very much. And looking forward to seeing my next visit home.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you, Jimmy. I would also recommend to reach out to the Old Mecklenburg Genealogical Society. They can be an additional resource for you for locating genealogical resources in Mecklenburg County.
Great.
And Jimmy Kirkpatrick knows that one well. As in addition, there's a particular one that focuses on African American issues. And again, somebody on this call may not know that there is the African American Historical and Genealogical Society of Charlotte, AAHGS, and look them up in Charlotte, and they'll be helpful.
Right. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I know we're coming to the end of our time here, so if you need to jump off, we completely understand. We hope you've learned a lot from this program. But before we go, I just wanted to know whether Tom and Mike, do you guys have any final words, anything that you just want people to walk away from here with when it comes to this toolkit? Nothing like putting you on the spot, right?
Well, play with it. Play with it and see what you come up with. And don't hesitate to reach out to contact us. There's a contact us feature. So if you have any questions or things don't work right, because there's a lot of ways things can go wrong when you start messing around with these records. So, yeah.
We had a friend who was on here yesterday who said the audio level on some of the videos is not high enough. We need to hear that kind of stuff. If you get to a particular point and you get stuck, it's probably not you, it's probably us. And so you would do us a great favor if you hit that contact button. It comes right to our computers, and we'll get back to you quick as we can.
We hope to improve the sound of those videos.
Mhm.
Let me put in a plug for books. This is Sorting Out the New South City. This is a history of Charlotte from the beginning really to the present, even though it says 1975. New edition out, and I don't get any royalties, so I can tell you how great this is. Right now on Amazon, this is like $13. You should just buy them and recycle them. You can make money that way. So there's that book, but there's a whole bunch of other books. This is a history of West Charlotte High School, Color and Character, Money Rock, looking at some of the poorer neighborhoods here in Charlotte, what the history is there. Julius Chambers, one of the great Charlotteans of the 20th century. So people often say, well, our history isn't in the history books. It may not be in your high school history book, but if you check out the Carolina Room and check out charlottehistorytoolkit.com, you can find out a lot.
I completely agree. And with our Museum from Home programs, one of the things we're doing is we're doing a quarantine reading list. And I think you will probably see a couple of those books pop up in the next week or so. So with links to how to access them. And you're absolutely right, reading and exploring history, it's something that's constantly evolving, and really you can see everyone's story in history. And if you don't see your story there, use things like this toolkit to be able to find it and write that story yourself. That's what history is. It's about finding those stories. And that's what we're so passionate here at the museum about. And I can't thank you guys enough for joining us for this program. We're obviously very excited at the museum about what this means for historic preservation and for telling these stories. Thank you to Adria for being our moderator today. I have just one more thing I want to bring to everyone's attention before we say goodbye and help you enjoy your wonderful weekend. So I'm actually going to share my screen for just another moment here. Because I would love to tell you about some of our upcoming programs here. So what you'll see, oh, gotta love the technical difficulties, right? Always fun. There we go. Now you've got a screen that should show some of our upcoming programs here. Next Wednesday, we're doing a special edition of our Lunch and Learn program, the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence with author Scott Seifert, as well as our host is gonna be Landis Wade of the Charlotte Readers Podcast. We're gonna go and take a look at the challenges on the frontier in the 18th century with Hugh Dusick on Thursday, June 4th, looking at what we can learn from the past about some of the challenges that we might be facing right now as well. And finally, on June 18th, we're going to be joining with some of our friends over at another museum, Historic Stagville, in order to talk about celebrating Juneteenth, which is this amazing holiday celebrating all of these things that people have done for hundreds of years to really make sure that everyone gets to be a part of the community. So if you want to learn more about Juneteenth, join us that day. But thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you'll continue to engage with us in our virtual museum. Thank you again to our hosts. Thank you to our amazing supporters. And we hope you have a fantastic rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
You.
Bye-bye.